This is the Recover with God podcast, where we talk about recovery from eating disorders, disordered eating, diet culture, body image, weight struggles, over-exercising, and anything related to food and body that keeps you feeling trapped. The enemy wants to distract us with these struggles, and that is why recovery with God is so important. This podcast will point you to God and the hope and freedom we have through Jesus, whether you're here for your own recovery or you want to help someone you know. So let's dive in and hear what God has to say through this episode of the Recover with God podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Recover with God podcast. I'm Jayme, host of this podcast, and today I'm joined by Calvin Burns, a licensed professional counselor who specializes in therapy for eating disorder recovery and body image, as well as addiction and trauma. I first heard Calvin's story on another podcast, Real Talk with Rachel. And by the way, Rachel was a guest earlier on this season of the podcast, but back to Calvin, I heard his story on Rachel's podcast, and I knew I had to reach out. So Calvin graciously agreed. Here we are today chatting, and I'll let him tell you the rest. But hey, Calvin, thanks for your willingness to be on the podcast.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you inviting me.
I appreciate you for saying yes. So, just really been praying about this conversation, and I know that I have a feeling we're going to chat about some things we've not chatted about on the podcast yet, and that's always exciting to me. So let's dive into the icebreaker
Great.
question. Zeal. It's one of my favorite words, probably my favorite word. And I'll share my definition of the word. It's living with a passionate and persistent pursuit of a purpose. And so I like to ask all my guests, what does living with zeal look like in your life right now?
Right now, the first thing that came to mind is just being a dad. We had our first kiddo 2 years ago, and we have a son. And when I wake up or whenever I get done with work and I see him, like I'm just filled with so much energy. And it's just something that for so much of my life, I didn't feel like I deserved to be enough, or I didn't think I was enough. And that's been a big part of my own journey throughout my life and my own individual struggles. However, in having him, there was something that God just placed in my heart, like, hey, even though you don't think it, like this little boy deserves a dad who's showing up for him and is present for him. And this is something I tell people all the time is how brave he makes me. And so that has been something that just warms my heart. And of course, there are the times where he frustrates the heck out of me, of course, and he throws fits and tantrums, all like absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But still, when I see him, it's just this beautiful. I am blessed to have this experience of like, man, this is how God sees me.
Wow.
Is like, despite what I do, despite who I am and the problems I have, he sees me as pure, clean, and just loved. And so, yeah, that's what came to mind first.
Oh, that's sweet. And puts it into perspective, like you said, of God's relationship with us and seeing that so much more clearly now that you're a dad. That's that's a sweet answer. I love that. And a unique one I don't think that we've heard on the podcast. That's why this question, I think we say this every time, but this question brings up so many unique answers that I never expect. And so I just love hearing how everybody responds to that question. And I have a second question that I added to this season too, that I didn't ask before. And in your opinion or your experience, what's the biggest lie that Christian men and women face today?
The first one that comes to mind is one of the ones that I experience the most with the clients I work with, and it's the lie that we're alone. And this often leads people to act in ways that are outside of their own morals and beliefs or values. That when, at least in my own experience or those I've worked with, when someone believes they're alone, they hide, they isolate, and they take on attributes and act in ways that don't align with who they know themselves to be, because they feel as if it's all they can do, it's all they have, and they have to prove something or be something or hide something. And in doing that, it takes us farther and farther away from what God has in store for us and what God's created for us. And so that can manifest in a numerous amount of ways, and that just seems to be a common thread that influences so many unhealthy choices or behaviors that I've witnessed myself.
Well, I've lived that myself as well, so I can testify. It felt like you were speaking about my own past, so I can only imagine with some of your clients and just the people that you speak with, how true that is. And to anyone listening too, if you listened to that just now and thought, wow, that's me, you're not alone. So I'm
Yeah.
so glad you shared that. So I think just opening those doors, making people feel heard and less alone, and that God is here for you now if you're in that situation. So that's a huge lie. And we want to break those lies and speak the truth here. And I know we're going to get into a lot more truth in this conversation. So, Calvin, I'd like to open it up to you now to just share your story, whatever God placed on your heart to share.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you again, because
Mhm.
my name again is Calvin Burns, and I work here in the Austin area as a therapist. I have wanted to be a therapist since the seventh grade. Like, this is something that I've been so blessed to know. Like, this is exactly what I was supposed to do, whether it's through high school, undergrad, graduate school. Every step of the way, it's been just an incredible journey to get here. What led me to that originally was my own counseling experience growing up.
Mm.
Gosh, I've been in counseling since I was in the fourth grade, and that doesn't mean every single day of my life, but
Yeah.
throughout my life, it started around that time. And the man that I met with, he was like my Christ on earth. He was someone that was consistent in my life and that was present for me when I had no idea what was going on. And regardless of what I brought in that room, he was the same, and he showed up the same, and he treated me the same, despite what I said or did or didn't do. And that was an incredible experience for me. Not to lift him too high, but I call him kind of like my Christ on earth, because he was one of the best examples I had of someone that was showing me love and consistency and support. And I don't know how I would be the person I am today without him. In that, yeah, that's kind of like the overarching story of how I got here.
Um, I I appreciate just your description of your therapist and how he was just so judgment free. I think sometimes when people think about therapy, or not even therapy, but even just telling someone else in their life about their problems or their struggles, that you feel like if I share this, I'm going to be judged, right?
Yeah.
And such a big fear. So to know that you can go to someone and you can share what's on your heart, you can share what's going on in your day, maybe even whether that's bad decisions you've made or just hurtful things that
Yeah.
have happened to you, like whatever the case is, and just know like there will be no judgment and you can talk through that with that person. So that's just so powerful, I think, to have that person. So anyone listening who hasn't gone to therapy, feel like maybe that's something you might want to do, need to do, and you're a little bit hesitant, just finding that right person who you can
Yes.
trust and go to and not feel judged is so important. And if you are feeling judged by someone, that's it's unfortunate, but know that that not everyone is like that. So I think that's amazing to just also feel like it's somewhat rare to know at such a young age what you want to be and then stick with that for your career, right? I think when I was younger, I definitely had multiple different ideas of what my career might look like, and then did not end up doing any of those things. And so I just always have such respect for people who just like know they do it and they're happy doing it. Like I think that's just such a gift God gives people when that happens. So so very neat. So in terms of your story and like meeting with your therapist, were there any turning points or any moments that really struck you, whether that was with your relationship with God or just what you were going through?
Absolutely. It, and along with having him and the great support that he was, that didn't make life easy and just everything sunshine and rainbows. That I come from a family of divorce, and my mother was an alcohol and drug addict growing up, and she was the one I spent most of my time with throughout my childhood. And while my dad was an amazing stand-up guy, that he was very different in that way and the choices he made and his overall health, he also was very conflict avoidant. And so while he wasn't always, he was there in my life, but because my mom had primary custody, that's a lot of what I experienced, was all of the different struggles that she had. And it come to find out later that he was doing a lot of work on the back end that just hadn't come to fruition yet. At the time, I didn't know that, and so it felt like he didn't care. It felt like he wasn't around. It felt like he wasn't there to stand up for me, to protect me. or really that he wanted to. And so between experiencing and being in the home of my mother and all the unhealthy choices that she was making, and having this, my again, my mom, the person that loved me and gave me life, and said that whenever she would mess up and I'd find these things, or I'd see her in the act, she'd tell me time and time again, like, oh, this is the last time. I'm going to change for you. Like, this is it. You deserve a better mom. You deserve someone that doesn't do this. You deserve for me to change. However, then a day or two later, a week later, she was right back at it. And so what she would tell me, and especially being a young kid, what she would tell me was not how she acted. And so what I took that as is like, I don't deserve for you to change. That actually I'm not enough for you to change and to be the mom I need you to be. And on the other end, again, even though my dad, it's not how he acted or what he was actually doing that I was aware of, but at the time it felt like he didn't care. So yet again, my other parents that said that they were protecting me, that they loved me, that he didn't take me away from that, even though he was well aware of what was going on. And also the third element to this, growing up, I was in a larger body. And so I was being picked on, spit on, bullied at school, and all of those things. And so I didn't feel like I had anywhere to go. Um, and while I always believed in God, I will say always, in the second grade, I accepted God. I went to VBS, grew up in the church, all that kind of stuff, which was great. And so I believed in God. I knew who he was. I knew about him. And Satan didn't deceive me in the way of saying that God's not good. Satan deceived me by saying, you're not going to find good here, that there's only good in heaven. Like, since God is in heaven, that's where you can find peace. That you're not going to be able to find it here, that this earth is just going to be hard and miserable and painful. And so if you want the goodness of God, you need to be with him. And so what I took that as was like saying, well, I guess there's not a reason for me to be here. That I can't do this, that the two people who say they love me the most and that they do anything for me, they don't follow through. The friends that I thought I had turn their backs on me and treat me and bully me and say that I'm this disgusting person. And then the God that says he died for me, he's not showing up either. So why would I stay here? And it was a night that, to not go into too much detail, that I decided to take my own life. And I remember waking up, laying on the ground. God just held me like a newborn child, like I hold my son when he was an infant.
Mm.
And I just remember him holding me and telling, and it was an out of body experience where I could just see myself being held by him and him saying, I love you and I see you.
Mm.
That you're right. It doesn't make sense. And I'm sorry that you're having to go through all of this. This is not what I have in store for you. This is not what I want for you. That when you continue to look to these people around you to find life, to find hope, to find meaning, you're not going to find it. What you're going to find is pain.
Mm.
It is, even though that's the last thing I want for you, it's when you seek me that you will find me. And when you find me, you will get to experience the love I have for you. When you experience that love, it'll be transformative. It'll heal you. It'll give you a safe place to land and a place to find refuge despite everything that you go through.
Amen.
And I just remember coming out of that and saying, in whatever form or fashion, saying, okay, I thought I wasn't supposed to be here. So I did what I thought I needed to do. And I am so grateful it didn't work, because that was my turning point. That was my game changer. That ever since then, despite what I go through, granted, I do at times hated it, I knew that there was a purpose. I knew I had a reason to be here.
Yeah, we all do, right? I mean, God puts us all on this earth for a reason, and gosh, that's such a hard thing to go through as a kid. I can only imagine. Just all the different beliefs and lies that the devil was telling you. And the devil is so sneaky, right? Like you said, he's not saying like God's not good, God doesn't exist. It's like, okay, you can believe God is good, but just seeing all of the negative things on earth that you've had to deal with, that conclusion, you know, the devil wanted that to make sense in your head, right? Um, but to have that intimate moment with God where he held you and just really showed you his love. It takes me back to your answer about zeal, and it makes even so much more sense now to me that that was your answer in response to that question about being a dad and understanding God's love for us. And so it kind of just brings that full circle. And I'm so glad that you're here and you're helping
Thank you.
people overcome their struggles and having that experience that you can now talk to other people who might relate to parts of your story and might feel alone in that. And so it's incredible. It's crazy, but it's incredible how God gives us each these unique experiences, as hard as they are to go through, when you come out on the other side and you can see how you're able to help someone else walk through something like that no one else could. Like I could not help someone walk through a situation like that because I've never quite been in it. So I just really appreciate you sharing that and just
Absolutely.
how you felt in that moment. And I also would love to hear more about if there was a specific catalyst that led you to start becoming focused on eating disorder recovery as a
Yeah.
therapist.
Yeah, so growing or kind of throughout my education in school and stuff like that, I always thought I was going to be an addiction counselor. Like that was going to be my specialty and like my
Yeah.
one thing. Given my own history with addiction and my family's history with addiction, I was like, okay, this is it for me.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed it. The first 2 years of my license, I worked at a addiction facility where that was the primary focus, and I enjoyed it. The work I did was great. I enjoyed the clientele and helping them and supporting them in those ways. And at the same time, there was this incredible just pull and just it really drained me. It was hard to separate my story from their stories, and just how day in day out hearing those things and being reminded of my own trauma and hurt, it just really took a toll on me. And there was a good period where I was really discouraged. Like, wait, I thought this was it. Like, this is what I was supposed to do. And over time, at that same facility, I would have clients that also struggled with eating disorders. And while that wasn't the primary focus of their work there, it would still be something we would talk through, we work through and plan and help them find support in different ways. And over time, I began to realize, like, obviously, addiction and eating disorders have their own unique differences. They also have a common thread, that there's a theme beneath the surface that fuels both or leads people to utilize one or both at the same time. And when that clicked, when I noticed that, I was like, oh, because and a lot of clinicians may not feel comfortable saying this, but I personally don't struggle with an eating disorder. However, I've had that intimate history with addiction. And so this was a gift to me in the way that I could understand in the best way that I could, not fully, but I could understand what it meant to have an eating disorder and the complications of it and the difficulties that come with it, without having that personal tie and connection with it, similar to that I had with addiction and that type of work. And that was a game changer for me,
Mm.
that I could sit with a person and see them fully and understand the struggle they had without having that personal tie to lead to burnout and things like that. And so when that clicked and I left that facility and went to work at an eating disorder hospital, oh man, it took off and I love it. Like this is that I had no idea. Like I said earlier, I never planned to work with eating disorders, but I love it, and this is what I'm meant to do.
That's one thing that really drew me to your story because when I struggled with bulimia, I felt like it was an addiction, and no one told
Yeah.
me that. No one ever told me that. It started to feel that way. It felt like drug withdrawals when I wasn't binging.
Yes.
And so when you talked about that, when I heard you on Rachel's podcast, I just thought, okay, I need you on the podcast to speak to this from a more professional standpoint because I can speak to it from a personal experience, but I it kind of validated it for me a little bit too, right? Like I
Good.
thought, huh, okay, it wasn't crazy. Or, it really did, it felt like a fix, getting a fix when I was binging.
Yes.
And then always, and it really even like progressed to the point where I was always thinking about my next binge. Like I could not stop
Right.
thinking about it, spending and almost like kind of like someone with drug addiction, I was spending a lot of money on binge food and more money than I should have. And it was just going down the toilet, literally. So
Right.
anyway, I think I agree in terms of personal experience that there is a lot of correlation. And the other thing that was interesting to me about your story too is my brother-in-law, my husband's brother-in-law, my brother-in-law too, he works for a rehabilitation house. He's like a director at one of the houses, and it's called True Purpose here in Tennessee. And there's a men's house and a women's house, and I was just really interested in what he was doing. And so I went and I spoke to the women a few times last year, and I was talking to the director there, and she said a lot of women who go through drug rehab end up gaining some weight because they're off the drugs, and then that can throw them into an eating disorder, which may be something that you've experienced with clients too, because they don't know how to deal with that weight gain. And I thought, oh my goodness, I had no idea. And so that really kind of opened a door for me with that conversation as well. It's a little bit different than eating disorder feeling like an addiction, but it is correlation, like you said, of they're kind of along the same path and one can lead to the other. So anyway, it's just such a fascinating conversation about that. And so anyone listening to, if you feel like, oh, wow, I never saw what I'm struggling with in that light, or maybe it's a friend or a family member who you see struggling with something and maybe that's putting some of the pieces together for you. You're not crazy. This can happen. And so again, I just really appreciate you bringing more light on that because I started to see that in some of the things I've been involved in, and it kind of blew my mind.
Absolutely. No, and you nailed it. That a lot of the women that I worked with at the eating disorder hospital at least had a history with addiction in
Mm,
some form or fashion, whether it went for a long time or a short period of time.
yeah.
There's a lot of comorbidity in that because it works on the same receptors. It can have a similar function, just that ability to numb and to check out and to cope in a way that the best way they know. And
Yeah.
that to trade one for another, that happens a lot. I had one client in particular, naming Ed and Al, her eating disorder and then alcoholic. And she would go back and forth throughout her life that depend on Ed or depend on Al. And
Mm.
so that, yeah, that is something that happens more often than people realize.
Yeah, it's like you've learned to cope with the one, but then the underlying whatever it is that's kind of causing that addiction, that's still obviously there. There's something deeper, right? So again, it's something was really interested in learning more about. So I would just appreciate you kind of explaining that and just helping people understand that there is a correlation or there can be, and that it's like it all goes back to just finding like that root cause, right?
Yes.
What are you trying to, like you said, numb and getting to the root of that. So I love that you named your practice Unending Hope. And I would love for you to share why you think hope is so valid in the process of recovery.
Absolutely. No, and I appreciate the question. Something every client that I work with, whether it's the consultation call or in the first appointment, often both, I walk them through my process and how I do therapy. And while that can include different theories and stuff like that, the main, I guess, mantra is actually comes from Romans 5, 3 through 10. And that the part that I quote is that suffering produces endurance, endurance produces character, and character produces hope,
Mhm.
and hope does not lead us to shame. And then I add a caveat that where the avoidance of the first step, suffering creates it. And that touches
Mhm.
exactly on what you were just saying, that avoidance of suffering creates and perpetuates our shame. And
Mhm.
whether we utilize an eating disorder to cope with that because we restricted one day and we felt good, we felt in control, we felt powerful in that ability to overcome our hunger cues, or it's bulimia to where that process allows someone to lose weight, whether anorexia, bulimia, or however they go about it, and then they receive validation from someone else and they're like, oh wow, that felt really good, like, oh, I want
Mhm.
more of that. Or it's a substance abuse disorder with a drug or drink that they could be introduced to by a friend, and they're like, man, this really helped me at the end of the day. Or it allowed their insecurities to be muted and numb to where they could socialize more and people enjoyed being around them. They're like, oh, it's all of how our brain is trying to learn how to cope with the hopelessness or pain and trauma that we experience. and we latch on to these things that we don't know how to deal with because we weren't taught, we're not told, we're not shown, because these things are so often embarrassing and feel shameful to share. And that goes back to that lie that we're alone,
Mm.
that we have to isolate, that we have to handle alone, that we can't open up and be vulnerable with other people. That leads us to this hopelessness that we have to do it alone. And so back to why I named it Unending Hope is out of that experience that I had there in that summer between seventh and eighth grade. Since then, God's given me this unending hope that, similar to the reason that even though I tried to take my own life, He didn't let me, that I have a reason to be here. I have hope despite what is in front of me, that He's going to make something of it. And that's what I bring to my clients. That's when I show up in that room. The reason that whatever they say, whatever they're struggling with, whether it's a relapse or a traumatic event that's happened to them recently or in their childhood, it doesn't scare me because I'm not alone.
Mm.
Because I have a God that is greater than anything that comes into that room. And I
Yes.
have a God that was risen from the grave, that overcame all of this, that He was persecuted, that He lived out that suffering throughout His life, and that He endured that process of endurance building and created the character that had the strength and the hope to carry the cross up Calvary's hill to say, like, this sucks. Like, I don't want any of this, but I know why I'm here. And I know, and I don't want to die on this cross, but I know that me doing so is going to bring so much more. And that type of hope is incredible. I don't, yes, I have a lot of hope, but I don't know if I'd ever have that much hope to be able to do something like that. But that is it. That ability to know that despite what I'm going through now, God has something more in store for me.
Mm.
And so that's why I named it Unending Hope. And that's why I believe hope is such a critical element of the therapeutic and recovery process, is because without it, personally, I don't think there's a reason to try.
Yeah. I definitely needed hope to try as well in my recovery. And I just love that you brought it back to Jesus. I feel like everything should go to Jesus, right? We all like even just having this conversation right now, I want to point people to Jesus. And you just gave the whole gospel so beautifully. Thank you for doing that. I love that you just shared that. That was amazing. But yeah, and also just that verse back in Romans that you quoted about starting with suffering. Like
Yeah.
Jesus doesn't, and the God in the Bible, He doesn't tell us to do things and go through things that He or Jesus hasn't gone through already,
Yes.
like you said. And He's just such the model for us of what to do. And even going back to what you're saying about like validation and all of that, I mean, Jesus was very misunderstood. He did not get any validation for most of what he did. A few people understood him, but he did not do it for that. He was doing it because, like you said, he knew the benefit, the total benefit to the world for making that sacrifice and giving us that hope that we would not have otherwise. And and without hope, what's the point, right? Like, what's
Yeah.
the point of even trying? What's the point of, like you said, being here on this earth? And Jesus does give us that hope and that purpose for our lives and just the ability to see things around us in a totally different way, even while whether we're in the middle of it or looking back on it, we can see how he was moving, how he is moving, how God is always with us, how we're never alone. Always again, it goes back to not being alone, like you said. So yeah, I'm just the word hope really resonates with me too. My Instagram name is Hope and the Girl, and so I'm very big on spreading hope as well, and knowing that that's kind of the catalyst for so many people is like if you don't feel hope, you're not going to try. So it's yeah, it's a great name. I really love it.
Thank
Um,
you.
and then this next question, it might be more helpful for family or friends if someone's struggling. But can you explain how a certain eating disorder or disordered eating behaviors are similar to substance abuse? I know you've kind of touched on that a little bit, but like if you could go into a little more detail for anyone who it might help
Sure.
them.
Absolutely. Similar to what I was just talking about, that it's a way to cope with the pain and the uncertainty of the things we feel and the things we think. That it's so easy to get stuck in the insecurities that we carry. It's so easy to get stuck in the lies that we tell ourselves, and that we
Mhm.
find these behaviors in the way of an eating disorder, that whether it's restricting or it's purging or it's eating too much, And then also purging that, in short, and this is not a fully educated response, but in short, our brain doesn't know the difference between it just knows dopamine. That when
Mm.
we get that rush, when we feel something good, it's just like, oh, give me more of that. Whether it's, for some people, it's
Yep.
restricting. For other people, it is that purge cycle, that release that they get from that. They feel empty and their body's like, oh, that relief. And it tells their body, like, oh, I feel better. And that, while innately it doesn't have to be a bad thing, when we then seek that relief solely through that mean, and not allow that to be, if our body is truly genuinely sick, to get that toxin out of our body, that becomes something that we then depend on. And it's a way to numb.
Mm.
It's a way to disassociate. It's a way to not feel the way we feel in that moment. And we become dependent upon it. We then pursue it, just like, as you mentioned earlier at the beginning of the podcast, we pursue it just like a drink or a drug, that it can hit the same receptors. It can have the same behavior and habit of like, no, I need this.
Yeah.
I need it. I can't survive without it, whether it's restricting, binging, purging, you name it. All of those behaviors inside of our brain and the receptors, they can use and fulfill the same purpose, even though it is a different approach.
Mhm. Yeah, there was a time when I was, as I mentioned earlier, just always thinking about that next binge, and it did actually felt like if I didn't give into it, that something horrible would happen. Like I would,
Right.
like almost like I would die. And
Sure.
one of the lies I had to break for myself was telling myself, when you feel that intense feeling, it's not going to kill you if you just don't give into it. Like you're going to be really uncomfortable. You're going to
Yes.
feel
Yes.
horrible, but it's not going to kill you. And you just have to sit with it. And just doing that over and over and over again until it starts to kind of desensitize yourself to that feeling a little bit.
Yes.
And it takes a lot of time, but it's a weird thing to think about because obviously it's not going to kill me. But like once it actually hit my brain, like this isn't going to kill you, I thought, wow, okay, well then let's just fight through this. So
Yeah.
anyway, I just think just that correlation again. So if you're listening now, you know someone's struggling, or maybe you are, and you feel like, oh, that's what they're going through, or that's what I'm going through. Like it is real. Like that feeling is real, but it is not going to kill you, and it's not going to
Yes.
kill that person. But to the person listening now, or maybe they're listening and they know someone struggling, and it just seems like that cycle will never break. What would you say to that person? They feel like they're
Great
never going to
question.
get out of it.
That I would say that you're right. It does. It is an addiction. That not only does it feel like one, it is.
Mhm.
That in for my own story and substance, that it's something that you touched on, is like that hopelessness in letting go of that skill. That I thought that was the only way for me to get through. I thought that was it. Like, how
Yeah.
would I function and be a member of society if I don't have this?
Hmm.
And something that I personally forgotten and had to be reminded of, and that I work with different clients that I have, is just like we trained ourselves into something, our mind is an incredible thing that we can also train it out of it.
Mm.
Granted, the second half of that is a lot harder. It's a
Yes.
lot to train ourselves out of it, but it's exactly what you said. Even though logically, good night, how many conversations I've had with loved ones, family members, spouses, friends, that it's like, well, why don't they just eat? Well, no, like, oh, throwing up is like, oh, that doesn't feel good. Why would you do that? Or
Hmm.
why would you keep drinking? Like, don't you see what it's doing? It's like, well, yeah, duh. Like, yes, they see it, but it's just,
Yeah.
they don't, it, because of where they are and how they've become so trained to believe that this is the only option for them, they can't see otherwise.
Hmm.
That it is real, and it's just this, it's our body's incredible ability to cope and create its own logic. But again, in the same way, we can reprogram that. And so what I would say to them is, what you're experiencing is 100% real. That it is not, you are not broken, that you are not crazy, you are not without hope. And that just like there have been many before you that have been able to change and overcome this, that there's hope for you too.
Yes.
However, you have to make the choice to take that chance.
It is a choice. Yeah, it's such a choice every and daily, minute by minute,
Yes.
sometimes choice, but it is possible. And if you choose it for yourself, no one can choose it for you, but if you choose it for yourself and you keep choosing it with God, That's the key.
Right.
Yeah, it's possible. So, yeah, thanks for explaining that and just the whole reprogramming. I think that's really helpful to think about it in that term and kind of make it more tangible. Now, I heard going back to Rachel's podcast that you were on, where I first heard you talk, I heard you mention the phrase opportunity to change. We're just talking about change here, so I would love
Yeah.
for you to kind of elaborate a little bit more on that phrase.
Absolutely. No, that, I mean, I think that encapsulates everything we were just talking about.
Hmm.
That every moment, as you said so well, it is a daily, hourly, minutes decision that am I going to take this opportunity to change? That everyone has an opportunity. It's just whether or not we not only are aware of that opportunity, which most people aren't. If they're that active in their addiction or their eating disorder, they're not aware. That has become their lifestyle. That has become their go-to and their only option, their only hope. And so that's a big part of the beginning of the journey is that acknowledgement of the denial that they're in and that the disassociation from reality that they've created to survive, that there is just even the option. That's the first step. And so that opportunity to change is a moment to moment decision that, hey, am I going to take this opportunity? And does everyone do that? No, of course not. There's plenty of days where people don't, and then they still have the next opportunity to do so.
Mm,
That it's not
yeah.
a one time deal, just like God's grace. And that's another way that I relay that to my clients is God's grace is that opportunity to change. That when we lay our struggles, our problems, our fears, our insecurities at his feet, he takes that, he wipes it clean, and he gives you that opportunity to make a different choice. And it is
Yes.
through that grace that we find freedom and the ability to stand up and have hope for something more. Because again, if we take it on our own and we try and do it alone, that's the biggest lie that's going to continue to keep us in that spiral, in that place of suffering that it's
Yeah.
so hard to shake.
Yeah, I appreciate that you said that you can try, you can try it again. This opportunity to change is not a once in a lifetime opportunity to change. Because, one thing for me in my past, I'm a very all or nothing person. And so if anyone else out there is like me, you have that mindset where you fail and you have to start all over, or you just ruined everything and all the progress you made is just disappeared. And that's so not true. You can pick up in the next moment and keep going where you left off, not starting all over again like it didn't count. So I appreciate you sharing kind of like that second part to the statement. And I hope that helps anyone out there who might have that all or nothing mindset like I always struggle with. So um yeah, thanks for explaining that. And if you do you have any final thoughts, anything that we didn't cover that you feel really important to share with any of the listeners?
Absolutely. And I may have said this at times, but one of the things I always like to end on is just that you're not alone. Um, whether you feel nervous, hopeless, doubtful of change, that as I said earlier, like God is so much greater than all of that. And that not only
Yeah.
are you not alone, he sees you and he's waiting,
Yes.
that he is always going to be there, that even though it feels like he's silent, it feels like he's distant, he's not gone. And
Mm.
that's the biggest thing. That's one of the biggest problems that at least I've noticed in those that I work with is that when they experience God's silence, they think that he's gone and rejected them. That's the farthest thing from the truth. It's every
Mm.
moment that we approach him, he is willing to take us back to provide that opportunity for change. And so to make it short, to go back to your question, that you're not alone, to reach out for help, whether that's a friend, a pastor, a therapist, just anyone, just reach out. You won't regret it.
Calvin, I just want to thank you for your vulnerability, your expertise, your experience, and just all of the information that you shared, all of the helpful tips and tools, and just ways of thinking about eating disorders and addiction, and just how they can kind of be intertwined for anyone who might be struggling with feeling that way and just I'm not sure what's going on or why they feel that way, or maybe they feel alone. I just that whole conversation about feeling alone, like you just were talking about, it's so important. The devil wants to isolate us, right? Like he wants us
Right.
to stay siloed. He wants us to stay stuck and feel like we're the only one. And we have to either put up a facade or just bury our head in the sand, whatever that looks like for you. And that's just not how God designed us to live. So thank
Right.
you so much for just sharing your heart here, and I just know it's gonna help someone, at least one person listening, probably many more than that, but at least one person listening now who just thought, "Wow, you get me. You understand what I'm going through." And so on that note, I would love for you to share how anyone listening might be able to connect with you or work with you or just learn more from you.
Yeah. So I actually don't have a social media presence. So the best way to find me
Right.
is just to either Google Calvin Burns Austin, or you can go to unendinghope.net. And that's .net, not .com. That's the easiest one to go to, but
Yeah.
unendinghope.net. And that's where you can find ways to connect with me via email, leave a message, all that kind of stuff.
Great, and I will link that in the show notes, so we'll get .net in there instead of
Great.
.com, and people can reach out to you, and I just definitely wanna make sure there's an opportunity, especially if you're in the Austin area. I don't know if you help anyone outside of the Austin area or if you're able to, but if not, at least even if you don't live in Austin, go to Kelvin's website, learn more, get more resources. It's just I think the more that you can arm yourself with, that God can equip you with the truth versus the lies, it's just gonna take you one step further in your recovery process. So thank you so much, Calvin. I just appreciate your time today, your willingness to share, and I'm just praying that this conversation is gonna help so many people out there.
Thank you. No, I really appreciate the opportunity. I enjoyed it.
Me too.
Hey there, it's Jayme again, and you made it to the end of this episode of the Recover with God podcast. I pray that God is speaking to your heart right now and that you go on with your day feeling less alone. If you haven't already, I hope you hit that follow button to subscribe and receive notifications for future episodes. And did you know that if you leave a quick rating or review, you can help more people find this podcast too? God designed us for community, so follow along and help others do the same to feel less alone together. I hope you tune in next time, and until then, you can always catch up on any past podcasts you might have missed. P.S. I'm cheering for you.